and we appear to be live on Facebook. For those of you on Facebook who are watching, welcome to the online Gurdjieff group meeting, Sunday, December the 15th, 2019. And I should mention that this will be the last meeting for the year, taking the next 2 weeks off because of the Christmas time and the seasons. So there will not be a meeting next week or the week after, and we will resume on January the 5th. Brian, how are things in your inner life? How's your inner work going?
The inner work is going really well. As we were just talking about, I found that personality test really interesting. So I'm kind of going through those results and taking what I can from it. Being the holiday season, I've been out more over the past few weeks for just holiday parties and things. And usually it's not my favorite thing to do to go to holiday parties, but I'm getting out there and making the best of it, and it's getting a lot of good observations with in the crowds. So it's been good.
When you talk about holiday parties, do you mean invited to a friend's place and there's a big party there, or do you know a lot of the people?
I'll know the host and maybe a few others, but I don't know a majority of them. But I go, and I've actually it used to kind of like roll my eyes at going to functions like that, but now I really look at it as an opportunity to go be more social and make observations about other people and myself, and I'm trying to use it as an opportunity for work.
Yeah, I used to hate going to parties. They were amongst the most difficult things for me to go to. If I knew more than 50% of the people at the party, it was okay. If I knew less, it was just my anxiety circuits and everything would get triggered, and my social anxiety and all of that. But I learned, and it took me years to figure this out, that people go to parties to meet people. And you just follow your hand and you go, "Hi, my name's Brian." And you shake someone's hand and you ask them about themselves. So how do you know the host? What do you do? People's number one topic of interest is themselves. And if you ask open-ended questions, that is questions that don't require a yes or no answer, so that they have to elaborate, it's amazing what people will tell you. And to play it as a game, to see how much information you can get out of people, how comfortable you can make them feel. When I talked about internal and external considering, I talked a little bit about NLP. And if they move their arm in a big way and you move your arm in a little way, and you just softly, subtly mirror them, asking them lots of questions, using that, it's a wonderful opportunity to observe yourself in that situation and to observe someone else. It's not like disturbing someone who's sitting quietly reading a book in a coffee shop or wherever other people might go to talk. In parties, people expect to be disturbed. They expect to meet new people. It took me years to realize this, to get over that hump, that they are here to meet people. They are here to have a party and hopefully expand their circle of friends. So you're right. It's a wonderful opportunity to really pay attention to yourself, the circuits in your own body. As an introvert, your anxiety circuit will be triggered slightly. And just to be aware of that, aware of yourself, but aware of the other person too. It'll give you the opportunity to externally consider. Ian, how are things going down in your neck of the world? Oregon, Portland, Oregon.
Going okay. Outwardly, things are a bit rough. It's just a slow season for us with our business, so blah.
Yeah.
Inwardly, the result from the test of introversion extroversion for me was, at first I was like, this test is not right. This is Doesn't matter. I've taken this test before. I mean, I even put it on the thread. I've taken this test before, and this is not the result I expect. Where I was very, very introverted and hardly any extroverted. I've had other tests where it's like half and half, but I've been thinking about it and thinking back to. I haven't been to any holiday parties, but I went to a Halloween party back when that was an appropriate thing to have, and you know, I talked to the two people that I knew there, the three people that I knew there, and didn't talk to anybody else, and had a few interactions with people I didn't know just kind of by happenstance, and did not try and get to know them. Just, you know, got through that as quick as I could. And it kind of actually touches in on my question about how to change things or just observe them. And so I have this story now that I'm more extroverted, and I might be a little bit more, but I have this story that I'm like pretty even, and yet the test tells me I'm not. And I think back to when I'm meeting new people, and I still have, you know, a lot of anxiety and a lot of shutdown around that. And so it's sort of a challenge to the story I have about myself, that I've gotten much better. And there are certain circumstances where I can be very outgoing and meeting new people, but usually there are circumstances where I'm in control of the situation. I'm hosting either a party or a get together, some kind of a meetup. New people come in, I'm like, oh, hey, welcome, come on in, have a seat, blah, 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 whatever. And if I'm in control, it's much easier for me to relax. If I'm going to someone else's party where everybody seems to know each other and I don't, that's very triggering for me.
The fact that initially you said kind of, no, this isn't quite me. I'm going to touch upon that today. This is a quality or dimension of our chief feature or our chief fault, that when it's pointed out to us, we have this real desire or whatever to deny it. And I'll talk about my own personal experience with my own chief fault later, and how someone pointed it out to me and I got so offended. This was years ago. That's not me. I'm not like that. It's not. And I am like that. It was me. And it was just such a sore spot that, you know, when it was pointed out to me, I couldn't see it. I didn't want to see it, but I had to ultimately acknowledge it. I'll talk about that later. Keith, how are things there in the north of England? Keith, hello. Can you hear me, Keith? I think he's frozen. Okay, Karen, how are things in Mexico?
Things are good here, Alan. I've been having these instants of incredible joy that just rise up in me. But the other day I had one, and I try to look for the instigation of this. I haven't been able to find anything that keys it off. But the other day it came on me in this terrible feeling of, I need to pay, and I don't know how to pay.
Okay.
So that's my dilemma right now.
You need to pay for the joy?
Yeah.
When I was in a Bennett group, this was quite a few years ago, it was talked about that the highest emotions at the higher emotional center come into us rather than manufactured from within. Most of the emotions we feel come from within. So they're triggered, some button is pressed. But there are higher emotions. I like to talk of them now as the Godward emotions, that it feels like they come into us like inspiration to breathe them in. And we had an exercise of imagining a silk thread being pulled through the heart. So you could just feel it pulled through your heart. And when you pulled it in, it was trying to draw that emotion that exists in the universe into the heart. And, you know, we can use the word joy. My favorite word is delight. And I like it because D, you know, G-D, of light. Delight is a phrase that a lot of people use to express this higher emotion. And so maybe you were experiencing this emotion like it's coming into you, and it wasn't triggered by anything you do or did, but rather it triggered, how do I pay for this? And how do you pay for that? How do we pay for our arising? I should, I should devote a whole meeting to that and the different ways we can understand that. But how do you pay for your arising?
I don't know, Alan. That's what I need to figure out.
Mr. Gurdjieff once said that, we are the brain cells of great nature. And to me, a part of paying back to great nature, to this world, to the ray of creation, is becoming more awake. So every time you self-remember, every time you try to be aware as much as possible, in that moment you are slightly, an infinitesimal amount, repaying your debt, paying for your existence. What about, do you talk about these teachings with other people, or do you just keep them within the groups that you belong to? Or does it filter out into your life? Do you try to help other people through your art, perhaps? Try to open other people to different realities, different points of view?
Well, I can't say I do that very often. I am very private and not one to expound my beliefs to other people.
Yeah.
But my art does have an element of, I would say, the work in it. So if someone's able to capture that, fine, but I'm not going to explain it.
Yeah, I noticed that. I'm going to talk about it on January the 5th. Today, I thought it would be better to deal with the chief feature. And all of us, somehow our chief feature and introversion are connected. Introversion is a part of all of our chief features. And you're stepping on it right there, Karen, when you're not one to go out and express. You're much more inward, more solitary. Somehow, this has got to be bound up with your chief feature. I will talk about my own chief feature later. And hopefully by talking about it, people will get a bit of a better understanding, potentially, of their own. Unfortunately, in this kind of environment, with YouTube and, Facebook Live and whatever, we're not part of a real group that gets together, that meets regularly, that spends weekends together. So we've got to try and figure out our own chief feature, our own chief fault. And I will talk about that later today. Keith, can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Can you hear me?
Oh, you can, okay. Because before you had frozen. How are things in the north east of England?
Same as ever, cold and wet this time of year.
Cold and wet. Yeah, and you're pretty far north. I mean, I think of Toronto as being north. But when I lived in New York, which was actually a bit further south than you are, it was equivalent to Frobisher Bay, which is just the bottom of Hudson's Bay. So at this time of year, you're getting about 8 hours of light and, 16, maybe 17 hours of darkness. And it's a very interesting time of year in the north of England.
We felt the sun yesterday, which was nice. I haven't seen the sun for about 12 days, and it shone yesterday, so it was nice.
Yeah. How is your inner work going?
Well, I just keep trying, practicing, doing inner exercises, doing morning sitting and compilation, the Gurdjieff compilation.
Okay.
I've had the Sensing Organic Life on Earth.
Okay, yeah, okay. Those are good ones, okay.
Civilization, that one, yeah.
Yeah, those are all on the YouTube channel, Gurdjieff Group of Toronto. Let's do an inner exercise now. Let me just pull up the vow of inner work. Oops, so I just gotta flip over there. So the recognition that, you know, we work for ourselves, we work for mankind, for humanity, and we work for the earth herself. Mr. Gurdjieff told Catherine Hulme that her body does not belong to her. Her body comes from the earth and will return to the earth. And so he told her, do not be identified with your body. But we are embodied beings. So whenever we do work, because we are in a body, we are actually doing this work in aid, in assistance of the earth herself. And then he told her that essence does not belong to her and not to be identified with her essence. And he told her that her essence was human essence. So it's like, you know, this jar of water I'm holding up and taking a drop out of the jar. That's our essence at this moment, but it returns back to the jar, metaphorically speaking. So when we are working on ourselves, we are also affecting our own essence and, by extension, the essence of humanity. And then, of course, we're working for ourselves. So we always work along these three lines of work. Whenever we do any kind of inner exercise, it's a good idea to acknowledge this in some way, that it's not just for ourselves. It's not a selfish act. It has ramifications that extend beyond ourselves. And this vow is found in the book Gurdjieff Reconsidered by Roger Lipsey. It was spoken in French, but it was translated into English. I wish to be. I can be. I have the right to be. I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. And here I would also add, not just to help others, but to help the earth herself, to help great nature, our common mother, whatever phrase we want to use. Mr. Gurdjieff was very aware of the environmental catastrophe that was going to be hitting humanity. It's within the book Beelzebub Tales, and one of the most important things he said that we can do to attempt to bring balance back is to self-remember. So I would like you to just begin by relaxing your body. Inner work should begin with relaxation. So perhaps you can breathe into the top of your head, and as you breathe out, send a warm and gentle wave of relaxation all the way down your body to the bottom of your feet. Just following your body's own natural rhythm of breath and breathing. Breathing into the top of your head, and then relaxing your whole body down to the bottom of your feet as you breathe out. Breathing in again to the top of your head, and as you breathe out, relaxing your head, your forehead, eyes, nose, face, mouth, jaw, chin, throat, neck, shoulders, chest, upper arms, upper back, midriff, solar plexus, middle back, elbows, lower abdomen, lower arms, lower back, your hips, your buttocks, your upper legs, knees, lower legs, ankles, feet, right down to the bottom of your feet. And again, just breathe into the top of your head and relax your whole body as you breathe out. And then bring your attention to your right shoulder. Aware of your right shoulder. And then become aware of your right upper arm, your right elbow, your right lower arm, your right wrist, the palm of your right hand, your right thumb, index finger, middle finger, fourth finger, baby finger, the top of your right hand, and then moving back up your right arm, your right wrist, lower arm, elbow, upper arm to your shoulder. And then become aware of your entire right arm at once, sensing your whole right arm. And try to remain, from the rest of this exercise, aware of your right arm. Try to maintain and hold on to that awareness of your right arm as you divide your attention and allow another portion of it to become aware of your right hip, aware of your right arm and your right upper leg, your right knee, your right lower leg, your right ankle, your right heel, the bottom of your right foot, including your instep, your right big toe, second toe, middle toe, fourth toe, baby toe, the top of your right foot, and then moving back up your right leg, your ankle, lower leg, knee, upper leg, all the way to your right hip, and become aware of your whole right leg while also remaining aware of your right arm. And hold on to this awareness. Remain aware of your right arm and your right leg as you again divide your attention and direct another portion of it to your left hip, your left upper leg, your left knee, lower leg, ankle, heel, the bottom of your left foot, your left baby toe, fourth toe, middle toe, second toe, big toe, the top of your left foot, and moving up your left leg, lower leg, knee, upper leg to your left hip, and become aware of your entire left leg while remaining aware of your right leg, your right arm, right leg, and left leg. And try to remain aware of all three limbs, your right arm, right leg, and left leg, while again dividing a portion of your attention and becoming aware of your left shoulder, your left upper arm, your left elbow, lower arm, wrist, the palm of your left hand, your left baby finger, fourth finger, middle finger, index finger, thumb, the top of your left hand, and moving back up your left arm, your wrist, lower arm, elbow, upper arm to your left shoulder, and become aware of your entire left arm while remaining aware of your right arm, right leg, and left arm. Try to remain aware of all four limbs as you again divide your attention and become aware of the very base of your spine, sacral 5, your tailbone, the part of your spine below your pelvis. And we're going to move up vertebrae by vertebrae. So remain aware of all four limbs and then become aware of sacral 4, sacral 3, sacral 2, sacral 1, and then crossing your pelvis up to your lower back, the lumbar region, become aware of lumbar 5, lumbar 4, lumbar 3, 2, 1, into your middle back and the thoracic vertebrae, thoracic 12, 11, 10, 9, moving into your upper back, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then moving into the cervical vertebrae, cervical 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then become aware of your entire spine from bottom to top, aware of all four limbs and your spine, and hold on to this awareness of all four limbs and your spine, and again divide another portion of your attention and become aware of the occipital bone in the very back of your skull, the temporal bones at the side of your skull, the parietal bone at the top of your skull, the frontal bone behind your forehead. And then moving down, become aware of your eye sockets. Become aware of the nasal bone at the roof of your mouth, the upper facial bones with your upper teeth, then moving down into your jaw and lower teeth, becoming aware of all of the bones in your face, plus your spine and all 4 limbs. And then hold on to this awareness and move inside your mouth. Become aware of your tongue, the soft flesh beneath your tongue. Become aware of your throat. Move down into your chest, across your chest, down into your solar plexus, across your solar plexus, down into your abdomen, your pelvic region, right to your reproductive organs. Try to become aware of your entire body at once. All 4 limbs, your spine, all the bones in your head, your throat, your neck, your chest, your solar plexus, midriff, abdomen, pelvis, reproductive organs. Try to remain aware of your entire body. And then become aware of the sensation of air as it flows in from the tip of your nose into your lungs and back out again. Follow the air as it flows in through the tip of your nose, your nasal cavity, back of mouth, throat, past your vocal cords, into your lungs and back out again. Tracing the sensation of air as it flows in and then flows out. And then become aware of the movement of the various muscles involved in breathing, your diaphragm, abdominal muscles, the intercostal muscles between your ribs, aware of the muscles expanding and contracting, your lungs opening and pulling air in and then closing and pushing air out, aware of the sensation of air as it flows in from your nose to your lungs and back out again. Become aware of your whole body breathing. This is the body brain. Aware of your body breathing, sensing your body, aware of your body breathing, aware of all 4 limbs, your spine, your head, your throat, neck, chest, midriff, abdomen, pelvis, right to your reproductive organs, aware of the sensation of air flowing in and out, the movement of the various muscles involved in breathing, aware of your body breathing. And then try to remain as aware as you can of your whole body, of the sensation of self, in particular, aware of the sensation of your body breathing. And then however you can, imagine breathing in the active elements contained within the air, and imagine breathing out a gray, foggy waste. Use the imaginative faculty of your head brain. I like to imagine breathing in sparkles of light and then breathing out a gray, foggy waste. Mr. Gurdjieff said, imagine breathing in, represent to yourself, breathing in the active elements of the air, and then imagine breathing out, sort of like smoke, like someone smoking a cigarette, exhaling that gray, foggy waste. Breathing in perhaps sparkles of light, breathing out the gray, foggy waste while sensing your body, aware of the sensation of air flowing in, the movement of the muscles, your body breathing. And then I would like you to become aware of your hands and fingers. For some of you, you will not be able to be aware of feeling. It's something you may have to work on. But feeling is different than sensation. It's blood-borne. It flows with the pulse connected with the in-breath and the out-breath. It feels almost like an atmospheric, shimmering, effervescent quality that we can most readily or easily perceive in our extremities. So perhaps you might notice this other quality that is not sensation, feeling. Perhaps in your hands and fingers, perhaps even in your feet and toes. For myself, I experience it almost like an atmospheric quality flowing around the outside of my hands and fingers. And to use synesthesia, to use metaphors of other senses, a shimmering, effervescent quality even though these are just metaphors, they're words to attempt to describe this experience which is beyond words. So try to remain aware of your body breathing, the sensation of air flowing in and out. Try to become aware. Imagine that you're breathing in sparkles of light, perhaps, and breathing out a gray, foggy waste while becoming aware of this quality of feeling, this shimmering, effervescent, vibrant feeling in your hands and fingers. And then just allow your attention to rest. Just allow your attention to rest. And I would like you to just focus for the next part on all 4 of your limbs, but in a specific sequence and in a specific way. I would like you to breathe in to your right arm and then breathe out your right leg. Then breathe into your right leg and breathe out your left leg. And then breathe into your left leg and breathe out your left arm. Breathing into your left arm and breathing out your right arm. Breathing into your right arm and breathing out your right leg. Breathing into your right leg and breathing out your left leg. Breathing into your left leg and breathing out your left arm. Breathing into your left arm and breathing out your right arm. Now the next phase may be a little too difficult for some of you, but try, perhaps even just imagine. I would like you to breathe feeling into your right arm and then breathe sensation out your right leg. Breathing feeling into your right leg and breathing sensation out your left leg. Breathing feeling into your left leg and then breathing sensation out your left arm. Breathing feeling into your left arm and breathing sensation out your right arm. Breathing feeling into your right arm and breathing sensation out your right leg. Breathing feeling into your right leg and breathing sensation out your left leg, and breathing feeling into your left leg and sensation out your left arm, and breathing feeling into your left arm and breathing sensation out your right arm. And we'll do this one more time. Breathing feeling into your right arm and breathing sensation out your right leg. Breathing feeling into your right leg and breathing sensation out your left leg. Breathing feeling into your left leg and breathing sensation out your left arm. Breathing feeling into your left arm and finishing by breathing sensation out of your right arm. And then just allow your attention to rest. And let's finish with the collected state exercise. As the earth is surrounded by an atmosphere, so too are we surrounded by an atmosphere. Normally our atmosphere is dispersed. It's pulled this way and that way. As we think about something or identify with something, our atmosphere is pulled in that direction. It can also be dispersed through sensations, pain, itches, whatever, as well as feelings. So keep your thoughts, sensations, and feelings tranquil. Keep your mind, body, and heart tranquil. Collect your atmosphere, draw it into you, draw it around you, perhaps a meter, maybe a meter and a half in diameter. Collect it around you. Become aware of the border of your atmosphere. And in a moment, when I count to 3, breathe your atmosphere in. And as you breathe out, imagine something remains. 1, 2, 3. Breathe your atmosphere in, and then as you breathe out, imagine that emanations from within your atmosphere stay within you and settle and coalesce somewhere inside you. And then silently in your mind, repeat after me. May results from this exercise be transubstantiated within me for my being. And then slowly allow yourself to just return to this moment. Now, that was a fairly complex exercise, the breathing into the right arm and breathing out the left leg, breathing into the left leg or the right leg and breathing out. But by moving around, we open ourselves up to the possibility of receiving higher impressions. Just breathing into one limb and then breathing out the next limb in the sequence, and breathing into that limb and breathing out to the next limb in that sequence is a very good exercise. It requires a high level of concentration. The ability to do it properly actually requires such concentration in me that I printed it up so that I didn't make a mistake like I normally do, because my attention gets lost because I'm going through my body doing it. But it's a very important exercise. It's an exercise that Mr. Gurdjieff gave to his students. It's an exercise that Jeanne de Salzmann in The Reality of Being actually publishes in that book, because she said it was released into the world. And it does require a high level of attention. A very interesting exercise. And somehow it's supposed to do something with our solar plexus. It's like it creates this kind of vortex or energy that circles around our solar plexus. And according to Willem Nyland, it allows us to begin to absorb higher impressions. Any comments? I've got everyone's mic muted. I'm just unmuting them. Any comments on the exercise? Anyone have anything to share or add?
I noticed when we got to the end of the going around the limbs, I felt very sort of balanced, I guess, between the two sides of my body or my brain or whatever. I felt very stable in a way that I don't really notice that I'm not feeling.
Yeah.
I don't know about higher energies, but I felt more present.
Yeah.
More.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's something, wasn't taught by Mr. Gurdjieff, but it's called contralateral self-sensing. I think I may have done it at a meeting. I've got an exercise on one of my, the Toronto Hypnotherapist YouTube channel called contralateral self-sensing. If you become aware of your right shoulder and left hip at the same time, it leads to a balanced whole brain state. And so in that exercise, I move around the body, and this is something similar, because we are moving around the body, becoming aware of these different parts of the body in a way we normally don't. And it has a lot of similarity to the contralateral self-sensing, as, you know, from right arm to right leg to left arm. And by doing that, it should be theoretically leading to a more whole brain state and causing certain neurons within our brain to fire. And they're located on different parts of our brain, different sides of our brain. And so by doing that, it's like click, 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 you know, around the brain and creating that circular thing. So that's an interesting observation. Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or observations on this?
That was like integrating brain hemispheres, both sides of the brain.
Yeah.
More centered, and feelings and sensations became more vivid.
Yeah.
That's all of my body, the whole of my body and mind's very focused. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's good. Anyone else? Okay. last week I began to sort of talk about levers. Quoting Mr. Gurdjieff's talk, at least as it was remembered by Fritz Peters, about astrology and finding out whatever it is that we are and then trying to cultivate the opposite. The next meeting, January the 5th, I'm going to go more into the nature of levers and figuring that out. But I realized it's more appropriate for me during this meeting to talk about the chief feature, the chief fault. So I'm just going to pull up some, whoops. I gotta move this down slightly. So this comes from Our Life with Mr. Gurdjieff. And, I've labeled it a story about learning to say no. I love this story. It resonates so deeply with me, and not in a good way, in a very uncomfortable form of recognition. One morning when I passed through the center of Essentuki, I noticed a poster advertising a special evening. Later that day, when I walked with Mr. Gurdjieff and Dr. S., Dr. Stenovel, I spoke of this quite casually. And here to set the setting, this is going on in the midst of the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution didn't happen overnight in all of Russia. It started in parts and spread out. And so they were fleeing and moving further and further away from it. But it was during the First World War and the Russian Revolution. So Mr. Gurdjieff led a group of his followers to Essentuki near the Black Sea. So he saw a poster and mentioned it. Doctor, and this is Mr. Gurdjieff, you hear? He is inviting us to the club this evening. What? Will you invite us for supper? And Thomas de Hartmann, this was bad. A supper during the inflation cost a tremendous amount of money, and I no longer had an income coming in each month. But there was nothing for it but to go ahead with this plan because I hadn't the courage to say no. That evening I took 500 rubles. In former times, a supper in the best restaurant would have come to no more than 2.5 rubles, and went to the club. It was almost empty. Now my hell began. Mr. Gurdjieff played with me as if I were a child to whom one wished to teach a lesson. Well, doctor, since he's treating us, come on, it would be nice to start with some vodka and hors d'oeuvres. Then later, it went on and on. I vividly remember to this day the oranges he ordered, because I did not have the courage to tell Mr. Gurdjieff I didn't have enough money and ask him to lend me some until we got home. How could I get out of the situation? It was agonizing. Finally, I decided to tip the waiter and send him to my wife for more money. Finally, the money was brought and I paid for everything. The bill came to about 1,000 rubles, enough for us to live on for half a month. Next morning, Mr. Gurdjieff came to see us and gave me the money I had spent on the supper. This was another extremely painful moment, not from the ordinary point of view, but because I realized I did not know how to behave like a grown-up man. Mr. Gurdjieff had told me several times, but only now did I believe it. That morning, Mr. Gurdjieff was not at all as he had been the evening before. There were no reproaches, no raillery. All he said was that what had been done for my sake. Some things to point out here. Mr. Gurdjieff had told him about this several times, but he didn't believe it. This is an attribute of our chief feature. We refuse to acknowledge it. We refuse to see it. And if someone tells us about it, we can get very offended. This is from C.S. Knott, The Teaching of Gurdjieff, A Pupil's Journey. From that day, something began to change in me. I began to think about what my idiot represented in me. So far, I had not a clue. I made up my mind that I would ask him as soon as I saw an opportunity. I knew that if I could discover its meaning, I would have a key to my state and my behavior, to that something so plain to others, but hidden from myself. So far, each time I had questioned him about my idiot, he had turned it off or had not even replied. One day we stopped at a wayside restaurant and ate in the shade of a pleasant bosky garden. It was very hot, the food in Armagnac were particularly good, and the perspiration streamed down our faces. When during the ritual toasting the idiots we came to my category, I asked him to tell me what it meant. At first he would not, but I pressed him and almost begged him to give me at least a hint. Soon he began to speak, and then in a sentence of 5 words, told me. I was astonished at the clarity and simplicity of his words, and under the influence of his presence and the clairvoyant effect of the Armagnac, I saw my chief feature, something I had never even suspected. When we left and were driving along, I thought about it and saw how this something had been my worst enemy, even from a child. It was the chief thing, perhaps among the causes that formed the pattern of my life and had brought me so many difficulties and spoilt so much for me in my relations with other people. I realized also that had it not been for Gurdjieff and his method, I might have remained always the same, repeating and behaving in the same way. I cannot remember the name of the place where we had lunch, but I have a vivid picture of our sitting in the bower on that very hot day, wiping the perspiration from our faces. It is astonishing and even terrifying that one can go on for years living with a false picture of oneself, and even with a wish to know, to have no real picture of how one manifests oneself. How can the dead know when even those who are beginning to wake from sleep find it so difficult? From that day, something began to change in me. The next one comes from Catherine Hulme, Undiscovered Country. It was my turn to be stunned. We took a taxi to the Café de la Paix for after-dinner coffee. This was a lyrical hour in that night's adventure, and this has happened very, very shortly after the Women of the Rope, the Ladies of the Rope, the group began to coalesce around Mr. Gurdjieff. This wasn't months and months into it. This was a lyrical hour in that night's adventure. We sat outside on the cafe terrace under the October stars. Gurdjieff studied the faces of the boulevard strollers, seemingly as relaxed as any cafe idler. But presently, he turned his great, thoughtful eyes to our faces, looking from one to the other, weighing, measuring, identifying. Then he began talking in a low, rumbling voice about man's inner animal, how he saw in each one of us the different creatures that typified for him our inner natures, the creatures with which we had to contend, had to keep friends with always, so they would help us to achieve the aim of his work. Help, not hinder. In Louise, for example, he saw sardine, not the sardine in its native element, but at that moment when it leaves the water for the sand to die, throwing its body over and over in perishing somersaults, and long after the great thrust of energy was spent, continues quivering, gasping, and flipping its tail. Solita, this is Solita Solana. Solita flashed me an excited glance. In our readings of the Greek esoteric schools, we had found some disciples named after animals. Was it in Plato, in Zeno? I shook my head. I couldn't remember. Not while Gurdjieff's hands were turning into sardines, twisting, arching, then flattening out to die, while his rumbling voice told something to our gentle New England friend. Was this perhaps suggesting the risk of the leap out of mechanical life into his work that held her transfixed, blue eyes popping wide? Solita gave a gasp of admiration. He looked at her and said, "You like my formulation?" She nodded, too overcome to tell him how much. Then her turn came. "And you, miss," he paused to brush up his mustaches, watching her eagerness, the pleading in her eyes that her animal be something strong and beautiful, something rare and, if possible, symbolic of the hidden knowledge which impassioned her, a unicorn, a phoenix. "You are canary," he said. It was so perfect for her that I lost his next words. I was shot back by the word canary to my childhood home and my detested chore of cleaning the cage of my mother's heart's mountain roller, the most costly, fragile, seed-scattering bird that man had ever thought to pamper for the reward of its songs. Costly, fragile. I knew she was always scattering seeds of thought. "Canary! Oh, Mr. Gurdjieff, not canary!" Solita's dismay made him laugh. I had not heard him laugh before. It was a contagious sound. I looked at Solita's face of woe and began laughing with him, though I knew she was simulating some of her distress to lead him on to say more, and when he refused, she pointed a finger at me and said, "What is she?" "She is crocodile," Gurdjieff said without preamble. It was my turn to be stunned, but only for a moment. I thought of the mud of sentiment I lived in, of the crocodile tears I shed so easily, reviewing every wearisome aspect of myself as the name of the most unlovely beast in creation echoed through my mind. But was I really so tough-hided, so somnolent, so voracious? My own picture of myself as thin-skinned, sensitive, and alert at all times suggested more the lizard than the crocodile. What did he mean? Crocodile. My God. He watched my discomfiture, then said, "I give you one analogy. Crocodile meat I do not like, never eat. But crocodile I like. I can send ahead of me to swallow enemy, can be useful to me. Now you understand." I was farther at sea than ever and shook my head, hoping for more. Something perhaps about the inner fortitude I believed I had, but he was finished with the subject. This comes from In Search of the Miraculous, an axle around which all his false personality revolves. And those who know me know I don't like the term false personality. All personality is false. All personality comes from the outside. I would be very interested to find out the Russian word that Mr. Gurdjieff used. Just my own little bugbear. So besides these general rules, there are certain individual conditions which are given to each person separately and which are generally connected with his chief fault or chief feature. This requires some explanation. Every man has a certain feature in his character which is central. It is like an axle round which his false personality revolves. Every man's personal work must consist in struggling against this chief fault. This explains why there can be no general rules of work and why all systems that attempt to evolve such rules either lead to nothing or cause harm. How can there be general rules? What is useful for one is harmful for another. One man talks too much, he must learn to keep silent. Another man is silent when he ought to talk, and he must learn to talk. And so it is always and in everything. General rules for the work of groups refer to everyone. Personal directions can only be individual. In this connection again, a man cannot find his own chief feature, his chief fault, by himself. This is practically a law. The teacher has to point out this feature to him and show him how to fight against it. No one else but the teacher can do this. And here, okay, I'll just finish this little bit. The study of the chief fault and the struggle against it constitute, as it were, each man's individual path. But the aim must be the same for all. The aim is the realization of one's nothingness. Only when a man has truly and sincerely arrived at the conviction of his own helplessness and his nothingness, and only when he feels it constantly, will he be ready for the next and much more difficult stages of the work. Going back to this, a man cannot find his own chief feature, his chief fault, by himself. This is practically a law. Now, those of you watching on YouTube, those of you watching on Facebook, we don't have access to a teacher. I don't believe many groups that exist in the world, whether they're Foundation or Bennett groups, really have such a teacher who quite has that ability to see. So the thing that's very important in this one is to realize it's a certain feature which is central to his character, around which our personality revolves. He called it an axle around which all his false personality revolves. I prefer around which our personality revolves. It's that central point within us, and we are blind to it. It's the biggest blind spot that we have. And as such, we cannot see our chief fault. We need to have it pointed out to ourselves. The next quote, again from In Search of the Miraculous. The most important part of the work. I prefer false I rather than false personality. The struggle against the false I, against one's chief feature or chief fault, is the most important part of the work. And it must proceed in deeds, not words. For this purpose, the teacher gives each man definite tasks which require, in order to carry them out, the conquest of his chief feature. When a man carries out these tasks, he struggles with himself, works on himself, If he avoids the tasks, tries not to carry them out, it means that either he does not want to work, does not want to, or that he cannot work. This is one of the hardest things that we will ever have to do, is to struggle against our chief feature. Now, all is not as hopeless as Mr. Gurdjieff implies here, because if we can learn to recognize our chief feature, we can actually create what are called will tasks to confront our chief feature. I've talked about in previous meetings how to set a will task. Perhaps after I finish this sequence of meetings, I will go back and redo that one so that we can understand ways that we can set these will tasks. But just going back to the beginning of the meeting, perhaps to go to a party and say, I'm going to talk to 15 strangers in the party. If somehow wanting to be a wallflower and not talking to people in the party is in some way connected with our chief feature. To put ourselves into situations where we create this tremendous friction within ourselves. It should hurt. It should be so painful to confront our chief feature. So if we do something that just rubs and creates friction, we're on the right path. There cannot be proper outward considering while a man is seated in his chief feature. And this is one of the real important keys to identifying our chief feature. Outward considering, external considering. When our chief feature is stepped on, it draws automatically all sorts of internal considering up, and we become blind to it. So this is more Ouspensky rather than Mr. Gurdjieff, though he quotes Mr. Gurdjieff as G in this passage. On this visit, the center of gravity of the talks was in the chief feature or chief fault of each of us. And Mr. Gurdjieff went around and told people about their chief feature. Whenever anyone disagreed with the definition of his chief feature given by G, he always said that the fact that the person disagreed with him showed that he was right. I disagree only with what you say is actually my chief feature, said one of our people. The chief feature which I know in myself is very much worse, but I do not dispute that people may see me as you describe. You know nothing in yourself, G told him. If you knew, you would not have that feature. And people certainly see you the way I told you. But you do not see how they see you. If you accept what I told you as your chief feature, you will understand how people see you. And if you find a way to struggle with this feature and destroy it, that is, to destroy its involuntary manifestations, it's perhaps the chief thing that keeps us asleep. So to destroy its involuntary manifestations, G emphasized these words, you will produce on people not the impression that you do now, but any impression you like. With this began long talks about the impressions that a man produces on other people and how he can produce a desirable or undesirable impression. Those around him see a man's chief feature, however hidden it may be. Of course, they cannot always define it, but their definitions are often very good and very near. Take nicknames. Nicknames sometimes define chief features very well. The talk about impressions brought us once more to inner and outward considering. There cannot be proper outward considering while a man is seated in his chief feature, said G. For instance, so-and-so, he named one of our party. His feature is that he is never at home. How can he consider anything or anybody? I was astonished at the artistic finish of the feature that was represented by G. It was not psychology even, it was art. And psychology ought to be art, G replied. Psychology can never be simply a science. So in this, we cannot see our chief feature. And when we are situated in our chief feature, it is full on inner considering. Me, my, how could they say that to me? Why is this happening to me? Maybe I should have been nicer to them. Maybe I offended them. All of the different manifestations of internal considering. When we are at that center of the cyclone, when we are at that blind spot, that center around which the wheel revolves, the axles revolve, we are in a state of internal considering. And because we are in that state of internal considering, we cannot see this feature. Now, here's a key to uncovering it. Those around him see a man's chief feature, however hidden it may be. Of course, they cannot always define it. And I'll go on to my next one, which is, this comes from J.G. Bennett, his book Witness, his autobiography. The inability to say no was my greatest weakness. At last, I began to understand something. Gurdjieff was making greater and greater demands on me. Some were absurd and even impossible. It dawned on me finally that I could and must learn to say no. It was like a blinding light. The inability to say no was my greatest weakness. He had stretched this weakness to the breaking point without explaining why or what he was doing. Of course, he could not explain, or the task itself would have vanished. When I told this to my wife, she looked at me pityingly, saying, "Has it taken you all this time to see this? I have seen it for years, but as usual, you would not listen to me. I would not listen to anyone, but I did have the utmost confidence in Gurdjieff." And this comes from the Women of the Rope. May God help you transformate to change. So Wednesday, June the 10th, 1936. I can't speak German. All of us of Knatsch Schmidt Company, Naked Feet Company, Mustard, plus his brother Dmitri and an Armenian merchant who comes late for lunch. This is Mr. Gurdjieff after Dmitri and the Armenian merchant have left. Sometimes even from such we can learn. You notice, by the way, he very nervous because he not have right collar and tie, wears old suit. For him, all world is here and he nervous for clothes. How I hate such jump up people. Simple man could never be nervous for such thing. Only dirty small man like this, only jump up people. Crocodile. She is accustomed to think of other kinds of people as jump up, like Park Avenue Americans. Mr. Gurdjieff, jump up people can be found in all countries, in every place where is man, in every kind of business. Moreover, you can learn just where to scratch him to make him give you his shirt. Each kind of jump up has certain place to scratch. I know where is for each country, for each profession, and can make all kinds wish to give me shirt. The word jump up. When I read that, it was like a dagger in my heart. It was part of my own chief fault, my own chief feature. Somehow in around 2002, the summer of 2002, I suddenly became acutely aware of my chief fault, my chief feature. It actually happened a few weeks after I was living in England. I was living in York. I was renting a room from a couple who were renting a house, and the male part, the man of the couple, didn't like me. And especially when he got drunk and alcohol was involved. And he kept on pushing me and kind of poking me and, you know, even challenging me to have a fight with him. And I've never been in a fight in my entire life. I've never hit anyone. And at some point, I just exploded. And he basically called me a jump up person and said that I was too focused on other people and wanting other people to like me and being, he didn't quite phrase it this way. And I exploded. I told him it was the biggest load of nonsense anyone had ever told me. He completely misunderstood me. He completely misrepresented who I was. By him saying that, it pushed me into such a state of internal considering. I wobbled after that for weeks, arguing with him in my mind. That's not me. That's not like I am, you know. And the more I began, a little bit later, a few months later, I began to realize the fear of rejection lay behind my deep introversion at that point. I wanted people to like me. I couldn't understand if someone didn't like me. Whoever you are, there are going to be people who don't like you. You don't know why they don't like you. That used to haunt me. It used to bother me. But I couldn't see this about myself. I was blind to it. When he pointed it out, I couldn't see it. But when I think about what Mr. Gurdjieff told Ouspensky, that when we are in our chief feature, we are inwardly considering. At probably the strongest form of internal considering is when we are in our chief feature. And so our chief feature is the most mechanical part of ourself. It's like the center of gravity of our personality, that axle around which our personality revolves. And if someone calls you out on it, the strength of your denial, the refusal of your ability to see it or acknowledge it, the depths of your internal considering that arise at that moment are indications that there's something there. It's so wounding, so hard to accept that we are in the biggest denial, and in the biggest denial, we slip right into the biggest internal considering that we can engage in. And so if someone points it out to you and you just get so offended and you get upset and you feel hurt and you argue with them in your mind, perhaps days, weeks after, it's something that you have to explore, something that you have to pay attention to. This brings us to something else that Mr. Gurdjieff said. Other people can more readily see our chief feature, our chief fault, than we can. And I've always said that, you know, if you have some like half a dozen close people, including members of your family, maybe even a little more, if you sent them an email and said, I will not get upset at you, I will not throw this back in your face, but what are the biggest weaknesses that you see in me? And this is really difficult to do, and the reason it's difficult to do is because it provokes such a feeling of internal considering. And we are blind to this central axis of our personality, and other people can see it. So your partner can see it, your family can see it, Your friends can see it. And if you ask them, and you have to promise them that there will not be any recriminations, that you will not get upset, and you pay attention to how wounded you feel. That woundedness, internal considering, is arrows pointing at this. Now, they may not have the artistry of Mr. Gurdjieff. They may not say crocodile or canary or sardine, may not have the artistry of the Toast of the Idiots, but you will be able to come to at least a working hypothesis of what your chief feature is. And I should also say that beneath and underneath and supporting and sustaining your chief feature is the ego. It's your ego. Those of you on the online group took a personality test. I was an extreme introvert. Now it shows me slightly on the extroversion side. All introverts. Introversion is actually a form of social anxiety. It's caused by the anxiety circuit, the amygdalaic, hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis being triggered, and it provokes the fight, flight, or freeze response. But underneath it, underneath the introversion, is the ego. And when we think of the ego, we think of the ego as a bad thing. It's not. Mr. Gurdjieff said that there are twin sentinels of the ego, to C.S. Knott, the twin sentinels of Monsieur Self-Love and Madame Vanity. He also said, do not try to destroy the ego in a normal person. The ego is a protective mechanism. It only becomes an obstacle when we step on the path. And then we have to ruthlessly expose the ego, or more correctly, the consequences of the properties of the organ kunda buffer, of the ego, to begin to root it out. And for me, there was this huge point in my working against my introversion when I realized it came from my ego, and my ego was attempting to protect me. How could I be shamed? How could I be rejected? How could I be made fun of if I never spoke up, if I hid in the shadows, if I remained quiet? My ego was protecting me from experiencing any kind of social humiliation, any kind of social rejection. It was much easier for me to stay alone by myself and feel really good about being alone than it was to have to go into the world and confront this. So one of the things that I did in terms of the introversion and extroversion, if part of it was a result of fear of being shamed, fear of being ridiculed, rejected. I accidentally, on purpose, dropped a cup of coffee in a coffee shop. The world did not come to an end. A gaping hole did not appear around my feet and suck me in. I caused annoyance for the people in the coffee shop. They had to get a bucket and clean it up. I once got running down quickly the subway steps, slipped down a whole bunch of steps. I twisted my leg so bad that I had to borrow a cane and use a cane for a couple of weeks. People ran over to me, "Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm okay, I'm okay." And I jumped to my feet and pretend I'm okay, because I didn't want to be humiliated. I didn't want to feel ashamed. And so during this period when I was working on fighting my introversion, I slipped down some set of steps. And when people ran over to me and they said, "Are you okay?" I didn't jump up I said, I think I'm okay. I think I'm just going to sit here for a minute. You know, rather than jump up so that no one would look at me, I let myself stay in that prone position, which the friction that created. So we may not have someone of Mr. Gurdjieff's caliber around to help us, to point out our chief feature, to give us exercises and things that we can do to counteract them. But if we listen to the people around us, particularly where what they say feels so hurtful, so painful, that we are pushed into that state of internal considering, to recognize that somewhere in that is our chief feature. And then I'll talk about, on January 5th, the next meeting about levers. And, introversion is a lever, extroversion. There's different types of introversion. Are you introverted in a classroom? Are you introverted when you're in a coffee shop? Are you introverted in a work environment where you have to give up and give a talk to people? Various different ways to begin to analyze, to look within yourself, to study yourself. And if you notice it's a certain thing, to do another. You can't see it, but there's a wall over here that's green. It's my green screen wall. There's a special name for the paint at Home Hardware or Home Depot. 5 years ago, when I was repainting this place, I went to Home Depot. Well, I ran out of paint, so I just needed a little tin of it. I went to Home Depot. They mixed up a little tin of this green paint. They gave it to me, and this was not on purpose. Completely accidental. I dropped it, and it broke. The tin broke, spilt over my sandals, all over the floor. And I didn't want to run away. I didn't want to hide into the background. As a matter of fact, I just stood there and went, I'm sorry, it was an accident. Then they got kitty litter and poured the kitty litter over it. I didn't run away. I didn't do anything. And I said, can you make me another one? And at that point, inwardly, I was going, yes, yes. In the past, I would have run so quickly. I would have gotten out of there so fast. I would have been so embarrassed, so ashamed. And I just stood there. And I didn't feel any of those feelings in me. And that was actually the point that I realized that I had kind of graduated, that I had managed to shift this particular lever over to the other end. So to look for these things within ourselves. Are there any questions? We've got about 5 minutes left. This is such an important part, internal considering, ask other people. If it really hurts, it's probably close to the truth.
Well, Alan, I'm wondering why you would say that extroversion is apparently better than introversion.
Approximately 25% of the population are introverts and 75% aren't. And if you study your introversion, you will realize that the anxiety circuit within your body has been triggered. When the anxiety circuit is triggered, it automatically puts us into a more mechanical state. It pushes us into a state of identification. We're not really allowed to, or we can't properly inwardly separate at that point. You feel more comfortable when you're alone, when you're doing your painting. It's a place where you are broken. And when you think of human species, our species, we found anatomically correct humans, dated them to 195,000 years ago. In 190,000 years of our species, we stayed within small nomadic groups that got no more than 150 people. They were pretty self-sustaining. Old would die, new would be born. But if it got too big, it would split into two groups. You were born into a tribe of 150 people. Every adult was like Uncle Aunt. All the other kids were like brothers. They were cousins and whatever. The elders were the elders. There was no room for social anxiety. There was no room for introversion. in those situations. You knew everyone. I remember watching a documentary where a mother was breastfeeding and she had to do something, and she gave her baby to another woman who began breastfeeding, who then gave the baby to another woman who began breastfeeding. How can there be social anxiety in those situations? Social anxiety is a result of civilization, and it's a result of not knowing people. You are not introverted, you are not shy with your mother, with your closest friends, with your children, with people that you have known. You're really more introverted when it comes to the other people. It's not a natural human state. And again, this is from experience, and I've dealt with lots of clients who come to see me because of introversion. It's the anxiety circuit being triggered in the body, and either fight, flight, or freeze. Normally it's you want to get away from the situation that is causing this tension within you at the subconscious level, and you leave and you prefer to be by yourself. At other times it's freeze. I used to go to parties and I used to hide in shadows, trying to hope that no one would notice me, be non-existent, so to speak. This is not a proper condition. Why shouldn't we be able to go into any situation and act and give whatever impression we can? Mr. Gurdjieff, in one of the quotes that I read today, said that, you know, when we deal with our chief fault, our chief feature, which leads to our chief form of internal considering, when we deal with it and take care of it, we can then become whoever we want and leave whatever impression we want in people's minds. So this is why I say it's a form of being broken. Now I should say there are some extroverts where that's a form of being broken. If they can't spend a day by themselves, if they can't appreciate solitude, if they can't walk off into the woods for an afternoon and just be with themselves, they're broken as well. And they've got to learn to enjoy that quiet, introspective time. So, but for a lot of us introverts, we enjoy that quiet, introspective time because that's when our anxiety circuit is not being triggered. We go to parties and we just say we're so overwhelmed and we've got to go home because we're so sensitive. No, it's not that we're sensitive. It's the anxiety circuit has been triggered, and our body is flooded with adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, ACTH, all these things that are triggering that. And so we have to go home and let all of those molecules slowly dissipate and be removed from our body. And then, oh, I feel recharged. It's not that we're recharged. It's that those molecules have left our body. So it's a complex, long answer to your question. So we're out of time. The next two meetings, it's going to be close to the Christmas season. So we'll meet again on January the 5th. Think about this. Ask your friends. Be prepared to have that dagger go through your heart, and recognize that that dagger, that internal considering, indicates that they're onto something. Try to feel your own way to your own chief feature. Okay. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much.
Take
Merry
care.
Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to all of you, and Joyeux Noël, or whatever they say in French. And Happy New Year. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.